On my 46th birthday, they handed me a cake that said, "Congrats on reaching 300 pounds." My sister toasted. To the family disappointment. Everyone laughed. Even my wife. I took photos, grilled steaks, and smiled through it. That night, I cleared out the savings account they all depend on. I, 46M, never thought my own family would turn my birthday into the worst day of my life. But here we are. The morning started like any other birthday. My wife rolled over in bed and mumbled something about getting up early to prepare for the party. I'd been looking forward to this day for weeks. 46 felt like a milestone somehow, especially after the rough year we'd had financially. I'd been supporting not just my wife and kids, but also helping my sister through her divorce and keeping my parents afloat after Dad's retirement funds took a hit. I headed downstairs to find my wife already bustling around the kitchen. She seemed unusually excited about something, which should have been my first warning sign. When I asked what she was planning, she just smiled and told me it would be a surprise I'd never forget. How right she was. The guests started arriving around 2. My sister came first, looking better than she had in months since I'd been covering her rent. My parents followed, Dad walking a bit slower these days, but still managing that proud smile he always wore when talking about his successful son. My brother-in-law brought the kids, and several family friends filled out the group. Everyone seemed to be in an unusually good mood, sharing glances and barely contained grins. We spent the afternoon on the back deck. I fired up the grill like I always did for family gatherings, cooking everyone's steaks exactly how they liked them. My sister joked about how I was the family chef now, and everyone laughed. I took it as a compliment then. Dad helped me flip the meat while telling me stories about his own birthdays, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. But then came time for the cake. My wife disappeared into the kitchen and returned carrying what looked like a beautiful chocolate cake. Everyone gathered around the dining table, phones coming out to capture the moment. I felt that warm feeling you get when you're surrounded by people you love, people you've sacrificed for, people who appreciate everything you do for them. My wife set the cake down in front of me with a flourish, and the room fell silent. I looked down and felt my stomach drop. In bright blue frosting, the cake read, "Congrats on reaching 300 pounds. Below that, in smaller letters, "Still growing strong." The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. I looked up at my wife, expecting to see some sign that this was a mistake, some indication that she was as shocked as I was. Instead, she was fighting back a smile. I glanced around the room and saw the same expression on every face, barely contained amusement. That's when my sister raised her wine glass high and announced her toast to the family disappointment. She went on about how I'd let myself go, how I used to be the athletic one, how maybe if I spent less time eating and more time exercising, I might actually amount to something. The room erupted in laughter. Not uncomfortable, awkward laughter, genuine, hearty laughter like she'd just delivered the punchline to the world's funniest joke. My wife was laughing so hard she had tears in her eyes. My own parents were chuckling and nodding along. Even my brother-in-law, who usually stayed quiet during family gatherings, was grinning ear to ear. The kids didn't understand what was happening, but they laughed because the adults were laughing. I stood there, candles flickering on this cruel joke of a cake, and smiled. I smiled because that's what I always did. I smiled because I was the provider, the rock, the one who kept everything together. I smiled because these people depended on me, and disappointed them or not, I had responsibilities. I even took photos. When my wife suggested we capture this special moment, I pulled out my phone and started snapping pictures. I got shots of the cake, group photos of everyone laughing, candid moments of pure joy at my expense. I documented every second of my humiliation with the same enthusiasm I documented every birthday, holiday, and milestone before. After we cut the cake, and everyone made sure I got an extra large slice with jokes about keeping up my good work, I excused myself to finish grilling. The steaks needed attention, and honestly, I needed a moment away from the celebration of my failures. Standing at the grill, I thought about the numbers. The real numbers that mattered. The $15,000 I'd lent my sister for her divorce lawyer and first apartment. The $8,000 I sent my parents every few months to supplement Dad's inadequate retirement. The $2,000 monthly allowance my wife had gotten used to for her shopping and spa days. The college funds I'd been building for my kids while living paycheck to paycheck myself. I'd gained weight, yes. Stress eating had become my coping mechanism as I worked longer hours and took on extra projects to keep everyone afloat. I'd sacrificed my health, my hobbies, my social life, everything to be the provider everyone needed. And this was my reward. The party continued for another few hours. People made more jokes about my weight. My sister shared stories about how embarrassing it was to have such an unsuccessful brother. Apparently, being the family ATM didn't count as success, and my wife kept taking pictures of my forced smiles. When everyone finally left, my wife started cleaning up while humming happily. She seemed genuinely pleased with how the party had gone. She even thanked me for being such a good sport about everything, like I'd volunteered to be the evening's entertainment. That night, after she fell asleep, I sat in my home office staring at my computer screen. I opened our banking app and looked at the accounts. The joint savings account that my direct deposits fed, the money market account where I'd been stockpiling funds for emergencies, the investment account that was supposed to be our retirement. I thought about my sister's toast again. The family disappointment. The woman who couldn't make rent without my help calling me a disappointment. The parents who needed my financial support laughing at my expense. The wife who hadn't worked in 3 years mocking my appearance while spending my money on maintaining hers. I started with the savings account. $47,000 transferred to a new account at a different bank, one only I had access to. Then the money market account, another $23,000. The investment account took a bit more work, but by morning, I'd liquidated everything and moved it somewhere safe. I left enough in our joint checking to cover 1 month of basic expenses. Rent, utilities, groceries. Nothing more. Update 1. The first sign something was wrong came 3 days later when my wife tried to pay for her weekly nail appointment and her card was declined. She called me at work, confused and slightly panicked, asking if there was a problem with our account. I told her I wasn't sure and suggested she call the bank. I knew exactly what she'd find, or rather, what she wouldn't find. While she was discovering our empty accounts, I was meeting with a divorce attorney during my lunch break. By the time I got home that evening, my wife was pacing the living room with bank statements scattered across the coffee table. She demanded to know where our money had gone, her voice rising with each word. I calmly explained that I'd moved our savings to a more secure location and that we'd need to have a serious conversation about our relationship. The conversation didn't go well. She accused me of stealing from my own family. I reminded her that every dollar in those accounts came from my paychecks. She threatened to call the police. I suggested she call a lawyer instead because I'd already contacted mine. The next morning, my sister called. Her rent was due, and she needed her usual payment. I told her I wouldn't be able to help her this month, or any month going forward. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. When she finally spoke, she asked if this was about the birthday party. I told her it was about much more than that. She started backtracking, claiming the cake was just a joke, that she didn't mean anything by her toast. I let her talk for a while before explaining that jokes were supposed to be funny for everyone involved, not just the people doing the laughing. My parents were next. Dad called that afternoon, and I could hear the worry in his voice. My monthly transfer hadn't gone through, and they were depending on that money for their mortgage payment. I explained that my financial situation had changed and I wouldn't be able to continue supporting them. Dad started talking about family obligations and how they'd raised me and sacrificed for me. I agreed that family members should support each other, especially during difficult times. Then I asked him why he'd found my public humiliation so amusing. Update 2. Word spread quickly through our extended family. My wife had called everyone, painting me as some kind of financial terrorist who'd stolen money from his own children. What she wasn't telling people was that she'd been spending almost as much monthly as I was earning, leaving nothing for actual savings despite my 6-figure salary. My sister tried a different approach. She showed up at my office with tears in her eyes, talking about how she was going to lose her apartment, how she'd have to move back in with our parents, how this would devastate the kids. I listened patiently, and then asked her if she remembered what she'd called me at my birthday party. She claimed she was drunk, that she didn't mean it, that she was just trying to be funny. I asked her if she thought calling someone a family disappointment in front of their spouse and children was appropriate humor. She got angry then, accusing me of being overly sensitive and unable to take a joke. I told her she had 2 weeks to find alternative arrangements. I also mentioned that I'd be charging her for the $15,000 she owed me if she wanted to maintain any relationship going forward. She stormed out, calling me pathetic and vindictive. My parents tried the guilt approach. Mom called crying about how she didn't understand what had happened to her son, how I used to be so generous and family-oriented. She talked about how embarrassing it was to have to ask their church for financial help, how the neighbors would talk. I reminded her that she'd laughed at my expense for an entire evening and had seemed perfectly happy to be embarrassed by me then. I suggested that if she was concerned about what people thought, she might want to consider how her behavior at my birthday party would look to those same neighbors and church friends. Update 3. 3 weeks after my birthday, I moved out. I'd found a small apartment across town, nothing fancy but clean and comfortable. More importantly, it was mine. No shared expenses, no joint accounts, no family members dropping by to ask for money. My wife tried to stop the divorce proceedings by claiming I'd hidden assets and stolen community property. Her lawyer quickly realized that every penny I'd moved came from my individual earnings and that she'd have a hard time claiming ownership of money she'd never contributed to earning. My sister lasted exactly 10 days before she had to move back in with our parents. She'd been living beyond her means for years, and without my monthly supplements, her part-time job couldn't cover her expenses. She blamed me for her situation, conveniently forgetting that she'd been an adult with responsibilities long before I started enabling her lifestyle. The kids were the hardest part. My wife had poisoned them against me, telling them I'd abandoned the family and taken all their college money. What she didn't mention was that I'd set up separate education accounts in their names only, accounts she couldn't access or spend. They'd have their college funds when the time came, but not a penny would go toward maintaining her lifestyle. I started seeing a therapist to work through years of being the family doormat. It turned out I'd been enabling everyone's worst behaviors while sacrificing my own needs and self-respect. The weight they'd mocked me for had been a symptom of the stress I'd been carrying, both literally and figuratively. 6 months later, I'd lost 30 pounds and gained something far more valuable, my self-respect. I'd also gained clarity about what real family relationships should look like. My sister eventually got a full-time job and found a smaller apartment she could actually afford. She sent me a text message apologizing for the birthday party and asking if we could talk. I responded that I was open to rebuilding our relationship, but it would start with her paying back the money she owed me at a reasonable payment plan. My parents downsized to a smaller home and adjusted their lifestyle to match their actual retirement income. Dad called once to say he understood why I'd done what I did, even if he didn't agree with my methods. It wasn't the reconciliation I'd hoped for, but it was a start. My wife fought the divorce tooth and nail, demanding alimony and half of everything. What she got was half of our marital debt and a wake-up call about the real world. She'd have to find a job for the first time in years, and her expensive tastes would have to adapt to her new reality. The birthday photos I'd taken that night were still on my phone. I looked at them sometimes, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder of what I'd allowed myself to become, a walking ATM with no self-respect. In every picture, I was smiling that same forced smile I perfected over years of keeping everyone else happy while my own happiness withered away. But I'd learned something important that night. Being the family disappointment was actually a promotion from being the family doormat. At least disappointments got to keep their dignity and their money. The best part about my new life wasn't the money I'd saved or the weight I'd lost. It was the peace of not having to smile through my own humiliation anymore. It was the freedom of not having to fund other people's lives while neglecting my own. It was the clarity that came from understanding the difference between being loved and being used. They'd wanted to celebrate reaching 300 pounds. I'd given them something better to celebrate: the birth of a man who finally valued himself enough to walk away from people who didn't.